What's new here is that mechanism, that regulatory mechanism in government, that control mechanism, has now been applied to AI model.
Welcome to the Gen AI Security Project Threat Intelligence Podcast Series, Episode 7.
Anthropic's entire brand has been focused on safety, right?
Where expert hosts Rachel James and Dr. Bryan Nakayama, co-leads from the Gen AI Security Project Threat Intelligence Initiative, share the latest and greatest on AI threat intelligence. The opinions expressed in this podcast are theirs and theirs alone and do not reflect the opinions of the organizations through which they are employed. So episode 7 of the Threat Intelligence Podcast. Welcome back. And today we are talking about something that's impacted a lot of people that use Claude. And I was getting all excited to use Fable 5. I'd had the teaser on my interface that Fable 5 is coming. You've got the ability to use it. It's not going to clobber your token use. I'm like, oh, this is great. So I started making plans in terms of how I was going to try and maximize its use. And then something happened on June 12th. Bryan, Rachel, which one of you would like to tackle the details on June 12th with Anthropic, Fable, and Mythos?
Yeah, I think I can set a little bit of the stage here because this was a first for LLMs. This was a first for the world, and that first was for the first time. You know, the government has always had the ability to control the export of weapons or like weapon technology. But for the first time ever, the government didn't ban a chip or a weapon, it banned a model. And this, the US government essentially forced Anthropic to pull Fable 5 and Mythos 5 worldwide based off of national security grounds. And I think what's really fascinating is that this marks for us a line that's been crossed. So this is the line where AI has crossed over from being a product to this controlled national security object. And the state's now treating it this way, right? And I think, I think what's interesting about this, I mean, there's lots of things that are pretty interesting about this, but for, the blast radius of this, like this decision, this was an export control directive. And again, I just want to say for folks who may not have ever worked in defense industries or may not be familiar with this, but this concept of having an export control directive that is aimed at technology that's considered a weapon is not new. What's new here is that mechanism, that regulatory mechanism in government, that control mechanism has now been applied to AI models. And that's never ever happened before. And so because Access can't, these control models, there are these control directives, these regulations are typically applied in a way that's intended to keep certain types of weapon technology that has been developed from getting into the hands of foreign nationals, right? But because access for a model can't be very cleanly segmented, right? When we talk about export controls, we're talking about physically preventing the shipping of certain weapons or physically preventing the shipping of certain technology like chips that control types of weaponry from going to other countries to protect our security interests. But because models aren't a physical piece of hardware technology, the practical result was that this was a global shutdown for all users globally.
So to give the government their due, the directive was targeted to foreign nationals. And to give Anthropic their due, they've been warning about having guardrails around their AI. So then the confusion, or certainly a part of confusion, comes in where Mythos 5 and Fable 5. So do you have any insight in terms of the line the government drew in the sand, and how does it make technical sense?
Yeah, this was, I have a lot of strong feelings about this. This was really interesting to me, right? Like Opus 4.8 stayed up. And I think what's really interesting to us that have worked with Opus pretty extensively, Bryan and I and many other people that we work with have been using the Opus models to do red teaming, offensive security, those are fancy words we use for hacking. So we are using them as ethical hackers, meaning we are using Opus models as cybersecurity professionals to attack our systems, our technology, our company's systems before hackers do, so that we can find those vulnerabilities and we can fix them, right? So it was really odd to those of us who have been using these Opus models these ways that Opus, which is very capable in doing these types of attacks and this type of cybersecurity activity, stayed up, but these others went dark. And there was some really interesting in-depth analysis that was done on this. And it really appears to be that the trigger here, the reason that the core capability that the government treated as a weapon from this model was the ability to read a code base. And the trigger here was a prompt that said, fix this code. Now, the reason that that's interesting is before AI, there was always this race that happened when a company released a fix for code, right? We call those often patches, security updates that happen. So what happens in the cybercrime ecosystem is that if I have something that's broken in my piece of software, my application, and I release a fix for that, the information that's contained in that fix is then immediately gobbled up by hackers and threat actors who use the information about the fix to engineer an exploit for the broken code. And this has existed long before AI, right? So there's always been a race when patches happen that you're trying to actually apply that fix to your application. You're trying to apply that fix to the piece of software that you have that's been provided by Microsoft or whatever company before the threat actors are able to use the information in that fix to successfully create an attack and exploit that flaw. And so that sort of race between threat actors and cybersecurity defense specialists has existed for a really long time. To me, one of the things that this really was a negative impact for us is that my belief, and many other cybersecurity professionals' beliefs, is that by doing this, you've actually hurt the defenders. You've hurt the cybersecurity professionals that are defending our companies more than you've actually reduced the threat actors' abilities to successfully create an exploit. We say this very often as cybersecurity professionals. We have to be right, meaning we have to be correct in the way we defend our companies 100% of the time. And threat actors only have to be right once. They only have to get lucky once, right? And so when you remove the ability for us to use these very capable models like Mythos and Fable and be able to say, fix this code, there's a whole host of downstream problems that come out of that disproportionately, in my opinion, actually affect people's ability to defend. And there was a really fantastic write-up by several folks who I think did a great narrative. There's a lot of examples out there around this, but the one that I like the most and that I experienced myself directly is there is marketplaces, there are whole websites like ExploitDB, which is, as it sounds, an exploit database where people who have developed working exploit code share that code. And if I took exploit code, so I have it in my hands, I have the weaponized ability to exploit a flaw in software in my hand, and I go to Fable and I say, hey, I want you to analyze this, explain to me how this attack works, explain to me, it flat out refused. Right? Now, here's the thing. I have that code. The model knows that I have that code. I have the dangerous capability in my hand. But the attempt to put in guardrails to control the type of cybersecurity capabilities that are in these models now just makes it so I, as a defender, can't understand more about this exploit code. It reduces my ability to actually defend against it. So the whole thing traces back to this technique. I believe her name was Katie. I'm probably going to butcher her last name. Mosorius boiled it down to this: fix this code. And is that actually like a jailbreak? Is that actually, if sort of asking a model to find and patch bugs in is such a dangerous capability that we need to ban it? It really feels like that is leaving defenders at a much greater disadvantage than it is hurting anybody's ability to weaponize AI.
So what's the actual security logic of singling out Fable and Mythos? Because there's other extremely capable agents out there. There's other programs that are out there. Why would they single out Fable and Mythos?
So Bryan, I think maybe you should talk about this, because when Bryan and I first started discussing this, we both immediately hit on a huge degree of irony that is involved in this ban, and how it really came a little bit out of the narrative that Anthropic put forth themselves. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, so I think, the first thing I'll note is that Anthropic has an ongoing dispute with the federal government, right? The Secretary of Defense, or if you prefer, War, called Anthropic woke because Anthropic seek to impose safeguards on how their models would be used by the Department of Defense. And so that led to a variety of kind of, regulatory, I should say regulations on them, nothing approaching the level of what just happened, though. So that's a little bit of the backdrop right there. But, as Rachel points out, there is a deep irony to this, because Anthropic's entire brand has been focused on safety, right? The lab was formed after researchers from OpenAI left because they felt that OpenAI was not focusing on safety enough. They supported bills in California at the state legislature that would have imposed, kind of mandatory regime for safety testing and whistleblower protections. They have their own responsible scaling policy, which is explicitly about if the capability gets too dangerous, then you can't release it without some sort of safeguard. So the deep irony here is that the company that has advocated the most for safe use of AI models is the first to become the victim. Maybe that's that's too charitable to them, but the first to be impacted by these sorts of national security concerns, right? So there's a certain irony that, even then, these same capabilities, there's a open letter, I think it's organized by Alex Stamos, kind of points out that actually Mythos and Fable aren't unique in what they can do, and that there are other models out there that can do basically the same thing, which is a little ironic given the marketing around Mythos so far.
Right,
but this idea being is why they... Go ahead, sorry. Where they singled out.
I was going to say, because Anthropic has been the one who's been like, oh, this is unique and like uniquely capable. And you and I have talked about this on this podcast before, Bryan, about how, if you look at the statistics and you look at a lot of the comparative ways that this has been tested, the new capabilities are just what we expect as all models progress, and that many other models have similar performance to Mythos, but they're almost like kind of a victim of their own marketing in some way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're in a sense, they wanted to have it both ways, which is to say, we've developed a super weapon, but also, no, we know how to control it. Please don't regulate us. No, this is fine. We're the right ones to have the super weapon, right? And so, I should, and that kind of bind right between, trying to escape that kind of regulatory scrutiny where you're like, actually, just kidding, it's not a super weapon. Everyone else has access to it already. Is like, kind of a very deep tension in terms of this moment. And, perhaps to a certain extent kind of lends a little credence to, perhaps part of this was politics, driven by politics, driven by victim of their own success, that sort of thing.
And I think, to the point that we've made before, and the point that was being made, which again is really funny to me, right? There was such rhetoric around, Mythos having unique capabilities to the point that, we have to have like sort of a controlled release, and then, a lot of research, including our own, and a lot of studies sort of saying, it's not that super special. And then when they get the ban, they get like these, like 100 different cybersecurity professionals to be like, no, really, it's, this capability is available in, it's not uniquely good at finding and weaponizing flaws, right? And again, that comes back to this strong feeling I have that pulling these models only hurts the defenders, because adversaries advancement is still capable. Like, adversaries are still able to use other models that have similar capabilities, and all you've done is you've now reduced the tool set for the people who are defending against it.
So a couple things. So if Anthropic has spent years asking for breaks on AI, and then the breaks finally come from a national security directive he didn't design, is it a win? Is it loss, or neither? And does this effectively manifest as an AI slowdown or not? I mean, you've touched on the fact that it ties the hands of defenders, so that has to be factored into it. But there's those two things. They've been saying that there needs to be, people in the industry have been saying there needs to be brakes put on AI. Now it's the brakes are on the AI slowing down potentially or not.
Regulators, wait, not like that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think one thing it demonstrates is that there's no kind of clear and consistent benchmarking for model capabilities, particularly frontier model capabilities. If you read and look at kind of benchmarks, how good is our model at doing various cybersecurity tasks? Benchmarks seem functionally useless at this point because they're being saturated by models, right? They don't capture effectively what these emerging capabilities are. And so one of the difficulties is you get a lot of marketing hype, right? And it's very hard to kind of cut through towards, okay, what's the actual truth in terms of the capability leap? And so that's one of the interesting things that we've discussed on this podcast previously is you saw people able to reproduce what Mythos was doing using free and low-cost models, just effectively orchestrated, right? So you can think about two ways of advancing those capabilities. You either make a more and bigger model by shoving more data into it, or you more effectively orchestrate it, which is to create like a harness or kind of a system for orchestrating the interactions between models and what you're kind of trying to do, that sort of thing. And so, is it a win? I guess that's a hard question, right? I guess it's a win in the sense of, there is something seriously being taken about the capabilities of AI models. But I think, Rachel points out that it isn't a win in the sense of not actually helping cybersecurity in an objective sense, right? Because we still have models out there, we have harnesses, we have things that basically allow adversaries to do the same thing as Mythos, right? Just without Mythos. And then if you think in the longer term, the kind of use of these sorts of export controls might end up driving a lot of foreign nationals out of major AI research labs back home, who will then take their know-how with them, help proliferate that capability, and then also weaken the US AI industry, which has a very large proportion of foreign-born researchers who came to the US, studied at our top universities, and then went on to kind of help develop that innovation. So it's interesting. It's like, kind of I would say more than double-edged sword, it's a, multi-edged sword. It's going everywhere. It cuts many ways. Right. On one hand, it's great that it's taking it seriously, but also on the other hand, it's kind of incomplete. And there are a lot of downstream consequences that we're not entirely clear yet. Rachel, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think just to divert a little bit here, because this is something that I think, Bryan and I recently have spent a great deal of time looking at. It's a conversation that has come up a lot recently, and yet somehow I feel like it's not being brought up in these wider contexts, that this conversation seems to be like fairly isolated to our little corner of cybersecurity, AI nerdydom. And that is, Bryan touched on it briefly, but benchmarking, right? And one of the problems with benchmarking is for us as an industry to really understand and measure the cybersecurity capabilities of these models, we want to use a benchmark that allows us to use the same benchmark against multiple models so you can compare apples to apples, right? The problem with that is, first of all, there's a plethora of different benchmarks and benchmark strategies that are out there. The ones that are becoming widely adopted, what happens when, most of the frontier model providers are using one or two benchmarks is that then the models become overfitted to that benchmark, that those providers are actually using the benchmark structure as part of the way that they're developing the new capability in that model. So when that happens, when I'm changing and building my model specifically to perform well in that benchmark, that sort of defeats the purpose of the benchmark for the rest of us as a truly objective way of measuring these models' capabilities, because now we're not actually getting a sense of the model's overall wide frame of capabilities of all the things that it could do for cybersecurity, both offensively and defensively. We're only actually seeing how good was Anthropic or OpenAI or anyone else, how good were they at at training and developing their model to perform well on that particular benchmark. And I don't, we talk a lot about this, but I don't really know that there's an answer for that yet. I struggle myself to figure out how, as an industry, we could solve that problem. But I think it's really important for people who are cybersecurity practitioners, who are cybersecurity leaders, and you are very often being inundated with these benchmarking reports, with this, again, like we look at the marketing that Anthropic did. Oh, it's unique capabilities no other model has. And man, did that sure turn on a dime, right? The amount of time from that being the rhetoric to Anthropic saying, no, there isn't uniquely capable features, cybersecurity capabilities that are in our model. Like lots of models have that. I think that's super important for us to keep in mind going forward, because I don't think that marketing hype is going to change, even with this having occurred. I think you really, as a cybersecurity professional, as a decision maker, when you're trying to look at the threat landscape, like so many companies really released new roadmaps and really released new strategies and changed their patching cadence, and they did a lot of things in result to really just Mythos, but those were good actions because these capabilities are across multiple models. But I think we do have to make sure that we are taking all of that information in with a pretty big grain of salt and looking closer at the overall capabilities of multiple models, and not just buying in too much to the idea that one model is sort of uniquely capable in this place based just off of benchmarking data, because we know this overfitting, this sort of like designing your model for the benchmark is happening.
So as we wrap national security vis-a-vis AI, we've talked a lot about a variety of different areas AI is impacting, from small business to online financial money theft, to it's a national security object, and we're going to be coming back to it. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Rachel. And we will chat next time on the Threat Intelligence Podcast.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Threat Intelligence Podcast, hosted by Rachel James and Dr. Bryan Nakayama from the Gen AI Security Project. This podcast is produced by the Gen AI Security Project with help from RumRunner Media.